will also be hearing from Ed Moughon from the Big Spring State Hospital.
I want to talk a little bit about your state hospital and a little bit about the legislature and the impact that they had on your hospital. You've had your hospital since 1938, and it's served primarily folks in West Texas. And the catchment area for the most part since 38 was about Abilene to El Paso, Lubbock, Plainview, down to Rio Grande. When I got here in '72, we had a roughly 465 patients. And that was from that West Texas market area. Through the years of investing in community-based programming and the technology increase in the area of psychiatric care, we've discharged a lot of patients. And so the hospital got down to 155 beds over the last, within the last 10 years. When the hospital got to roughly 145, 155, those of us that were charged with being curators of the hospital began to look at the future. And so we had to come up with a new market area, because West Texas would not build a hospital, would not supply enough patients to keep a hospital roughly at 200 beds. And 200 beds is a magic number in state hospitals. There's 10 state hospitals, and the target number is 200 beds for cost efficiency. So we went and looked at where is the market growing in psychiatric care. And the market's growing the same place the people are growing. It's growing Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, I-35 corridor. So we developed a program to take overflow out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area primarily, but we get quite a few customers from San Antonio and Houston also. And so the hospital's back up. It's a 200-bed facility. And that's a term that I will use now, and we won't use the word hospital for 200 beds. As the legislature was looking in our world to save money, they wanted about the cost of a hospital. We're a $28, $29 million hospital, and that's what they needed to balance our little hospital part of the big economic mess that Texas is facing. They didn't want to close a hospital because there was 345 people waiting to get into hospitals. So they came to us and said, what have you got? Where can you give us this increased efficiency that'll equal roughly $30 million across the 10 hospitals? So we came up with a new product, and the product that we have here, and we have two sister hospitals that joined us, is we do intensive residential care. Now, there's a growing market of individuals that get sent to state hospitals for longer care than the industry normally adjusted for. And those are some cases, for example, there's not confidential, like Miss Yates out of the Houston area. Andrea Yates was committed to state hospital for not guilty by reason of insanity after an episode in which she, during being mentally ill, killed all her children. Well, she's now in the care of the Texas State Hospital System and will be in the care of the Texas State Hospital System until we can certify that she's safe to be released. Well, that's a little different from a 30-day stay in the hospital. So that market's increased in Texas. If you look at it through the course of the last 15 years, it's increased every year by 50 or 60 customers. So we carved out a product, and we now have 160 hospital beds, just regular state hospital beds. Half of those go to West Texas, and the other half we market out to Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, and San Antonio. So only about 80 of our customers are customers referred through the West Texas Community Mental Health System, through West Texas MHMR, or through Permian Basin MHMR, or San Angelo, Concho Valley MHMR. The other 80 of those customers we get is overflow out of Dallas, Fort Worth, and Houston. And quite honestly, we do such good work that they don't mind driving. Even though it's 5 hours from Dallas, it's 5 hours. We turn them around in about 20 minutes, and they're back in Dallas. And sometimes they can get care for the person quicker coming here than they can going through Parkland Hospital and all the steps and downs. So we have a product that they like. So we have plenty of customers. There's still 245 people now waiting to get in state hospitals. And we have 40 new beds out there. 40 of our beds at War Hospital are now long-term psychiatric residential. And I'll characterize them as like a nursing home kind of level of care, not hospital level of care. They're certified as residential beds and accredited by Joint Commission of Residential Beds. For this city and for this market, if anything ever grows in state hospitals, it'll grow in that realm. It'll grow in the long-term residential realm because that population is the growing population. And if it does grow, this hospital could grow about 50 more beds. That's about all we could grow under today's standards for accommodating people with the kinds of square footage and facilities. Now, nobody in here would remember this, but the hospital was 1,100 patients in the early 60s. And so one might think, well, gee, it was 1,100 patients. Well, in the early 60s, people were just lined up like a military hospital, one bed after another. So in today's standards, we roughly could do maybe another 50 patients, and that would be about it without new construction. The infrastructure of the hospital is solid. Even though the core buildings were 38, I've been there 20-something years, 22 years, but I inherited them from folks that had the similar vision of taking care of the place. And so we have good infrastructure. And years ago when the state contemplated closing state hospitals, that was one of the things that was positive about Big Spring State Hospital is that it didn't have a lot of infrastructure needs. And we try to keep an eye on that. And whoever is the next curator of the hospital needs to keep an eye on that, because that's one of the things about a state facility is if you ever let the infrastructure degrade to the point that the reinvestment to keep it up, then there'll be a move to build a new one, and then you get other cities that with more political influence that would probably have a better shot at getting them. The challenge with running a state hospital here, it's a specialty psychiatric hospital. The challenge, a lot like Larry has, is that it's recruiting professional staff. And I will say that, hiring psychiatrists and PhD level psychologists to move to West Texas is a full-time job. Having really good school districts, having a really grand community, and having the kind of warm folks in this community are huge assets. But it's still hard to do. It's increasingly hard to do. And so we do some pretty different things. We have about 16 psychiatrists or psychiatric PAs or clinical nurse practitioners. Only about half of them live in this community. The other half live all over Texas. And they come in and they work 2 days, 3 days, and we use telemedicine, meaning we hook them up through televideo hookup. And we provide our care with better clinicians than we could get if we insisted they come here, and we connect the hospital electronically. Now that's the only way we could be alive. Without that, we couldn't even accommodate the 160 hospital and 40 residential. So a lot of the jobs at the hospital, there were 640 going into the legislative session. We're down to 620. We cut about $1.1 million as our contribution toward the state reduction, and we're probably going to be okay through the next 2 years. And it'll be lean, but the state has to have state hospitals. I mean, they're kind of like a safety net. We are real fortunate in this state hospital to be a vendor for the Veterans Administration, and we love doing work for the Veterans Administration. We don't do a lot of work for them, but we'll run 6 to 8 customers on a contract through the West Texas Healthcare VA network, and then their parent, Vision 18 out of Phoenix. We do some customers out of the northern part of the Panhandle, so we like doing that work. That helps us financially. It gives us some extra funds to fund some positions and finance the hospital. Your Texas state hospitals pretty much pay for themselves in the third-party revenue generation. They've always been, when the state looks at what to do with state hospitals, they pause because we make about 30% on site in direct reimbursements, like insurance payments. And then we get a federal program that's kind of going away and will change with the new healthcare legislation, but it's been called disproportionate share, which is a form of Medicaid that reimburses us for all the folks that don't have any insurance and stuff. So Texas has a very low per capita expenditure on mental health care. They get a really good product. I always say that when I came to Big Spring that I was a blind squirrel found an acorn, because the people that we get to employ at Big Spring State Hospital are wonderful people. The two bad ones, you know, we'll find them and they won't work there much longer, but the rest are just incredible. They're incredible people, and they do a marvelous job of developing a healing environment. The hospital is not like you probably think it is. It's changed a lot. Psychiatric care is not like they show in the movies anymore. It's very recovery based and looks a lot like Dr. Sparks' campus. We use a lot of the same recovery models of higher education where folks develop their own curriculum and develop their own programs, and it's a wellness design. We would love to show you around. Some of you want to make sure you have someone to call and come get you. But just if you will call, you can call our community relations department, and they'll set up times where you can visit and we can show you around and you can see the hospital. It is your hospital. We're run by the Texas Department of State Health Services, but if you don't own the hospital, then they will run it their way. And they're wonderful people, but they're in Austin. So it is a West Texas hospital, and it has to be connected to the people of West Texas. So be very involved in what's going on. You can always ask what's going on. I can't really politic, but I can answer questions and always will. So I'm always open to people that ask for information and what's happening at the hospital. I'll close with a plug for our volunteers in the chalet. If you haven't been to the chalet, our volunteers are an incredible group of people that support the patients in the hospital, and they have recently fried some of their only money for the patients, and they reinvested in their chalet, which is a resale shop, and it's now air conditioned, so it's tolerable. So please, it's open 10 to 1 every day, and stop by.